3 years, Ryan, Aunt Patricia said, setting down her wine glass as if she had finally reached the question she had been waiting all evening to ask. What have you actually achieved? The dining room went so quiet that I could hear the old wall clock ticking behind my father. It was 8:17 on a Sunday night at my parents' house in Raleigh, North Carolina, and 13 hours from then, something was supposed to happen that could change the way everyone at that table saw the last 3 years of my life. I looked at my aunt across the table. Patricia Collins was 58, my mother's older sister, and she had always believed success should be easy to identify. A promotion had a title. A house had an address. A salary had a number. If you could not explain your progress in one sentence at Thanksgiving dinner, Patricia tended to assume there was not much progress to explain. That evening had started as a celebration for my cousin Jason. He was 29 and had recently been promoted at the financial services company where he worked. I was genuinely happy for him. Jason had worked hard, and unlike his mother, he had never treated our careers like contestants in the same race. Patricia had other ideas. For most of dinner, she had talked about Jason's new responsibilities, his office, his benefits, and the people reporting to him. Jason had tried twice to redirect the conversation. Neither attempt lasted long. Then Patricia turned toward me. "And how is your little company?" she asked. "Busy," I said. "Busy doing what?" My mother, Diane, immediately reached for the serving bowl. "Patricia, do you want more green beans?" "I am fine." Patricia kept looking at me. "I am just curious. Ryan has been doing this for what, 3 years now?" "Almost," I said. "Exactly. So I am asking a normal question." My father, Thomas, leaned back in his chair. "It does not sound like a normal question when you ask it that way." Patricia smiled. "Thomas, I am not criticizing him." Jason looked at his plate. "Mom, maybe we can just enjoy dinner. Why is everyone acting like I said something terrible?" She asked. "Ryan is 32 years old. He left a perfectly good career path to build a business. Surely he can tell his family what came from it." I could have answered. That was the strange part. Patricia still thought I was surviving on an idea and stubbornness, but the company Daniel Brooks and I had built no longer looked anything like the struggling side project she remembered. We had paying customers. We had recurring revenue. We had renewal data that would have seemed impossible 18 months earlier. And sitting in my email was a confidential schedule from a national small business organization that had spent months evaluating our platform. At 9 o'clock the next morning, its new logistics initiative was scheduled to be announced publicly. If everything happened as planned, our company would be named as a technology partner for the rollout. I was not allowed to discuss it yet. More importantly, I did not want to defend myself with another promise. I had done enough of that. Patricia tilted her head. "Well," I glanced at the clock. 8:18. Tomorrow should answer that. Jason looked up. Mom stopped moving the serving bowl. Dad's expression changed slightly, the way it did whenever he realized I knew something he did not. Patricia stared at me. "Tomorrow?" "Yes." "What happens tomorrow?" "You will see." She gave a short laugh. "Ryan, tomorrow is not an achievement." "No," I said. "But what happens tomorrow might be." Mom said my name quietly, half warning and half question. I picked up my water and took a drink. Patricia was not finished. "Is this another potential client?" "I cannot talk about it tonight." "Another meeting?" "No, an investor." "Patricia," Dad said. "He told you he cannot talk about it." She turned toward him. "And I am supposed to be impressed by something nobody can describe?" "Nobody asked you to be impressed," I said. Jason covered a smile with his napkin. Patricia noticed. "I am serious. Your cousin has spent 3 years telling us things are moving forward, but I never know what that means." Jason finally looked directly at his mother. "Do not use me for this." "Use you for what?" "Whatever comparison you are making." "I am not comparing anyone." Nobody answered because everyone knew she was. Patricia looked back at me. "I just think results matter." "So do I." "Then we agree. More than you think." For a second, something uncertain crossed her face. She expected me to become defensive. In the past, I probably would have. I would have explained customer numbers, product changes, sales cycles, and why building software for small retailers took longer than anyone at that table understood. But I had learned that explaining unfinished progress to someone determined to measure only finished outcomes was exhausting. Tomorrow was close enough. 13 hours. Patricia finally changed the subject, although dinner never completely recovered. Jason talked about a trip he was planning. Mom brought out apple pie. Dad asked me whether I wanted coffee. I said no. At 9:06, I stood to leave. Mom hugged me near the front door. Whatever is happening tomorrow, I hope it is good. So do I. She pulled back. You do not know? That was more complicated than I wanted to explain. The selection process was complete. We had been told to prepare for the public rollout. But after 3 years of watching opportunities disappear at the last possible moment, I had stopped treating anything as permanent until it actually happened. I know what is supposed to happen, I said. That is not the same thing. Dad walked me to the porch. Your aunt pushes too hard. She always has. You do not owe her a resume at dinner. I know. He studied me. But there really is something tomorrow? I smiled. 9 o'clock. That all you are giving me? That is all I can give you. I drove home through quiet Sunday traffic with my telephone resting in the cup holder. Daniel had sent one message during dinner. Everything's still on schedule. I replied that I would call him in the morning. At my condo, I opened my laptop and reread the announcement timeline. 9 a.m. Public release. 9:15 partner briefing. 10 o'clock media availability. Our company name was listed exactly where Daniel and I had spent 3 years trying to put it. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I remembered the version of myself who had started all of this at 29, when I still had a full-time software engineering job, a predictable paycheck, and an aunt who used to describe me as the practical one in the family. Back then, Patricia had actually liked the idea Daniel and I were building. She called it clever. She called it promising. Once, she even called it impressive. Of course, that was when everyone believed it was only a hobby. 3 years earlier, Patricia would have been the last person I expected to question whether I was going anywhere. At 29, I had the kind of life she understood immediately. I worked as a software engineer for a business technology company in Research Triangle Park, earned a solid salary, contributed to my retirement account every month, and owned a 2-bedroom condo 15 minutes from downtown Raleigh. My parents were proud of me. Patricia was impressed by me, and whenever someone in the family asked what I did, I could answer in less than 10 seconds. Then Daniel Brooks called me one Tuesday night with a problem he could not stop thinking about. Daniel and I had met in college, and while I had gone into software engineering, he eventually worked with independent retailers on inventory systems. He kept seeing the same problem. Small and mid-sized businesses were using separate tools for inventory, shipping, store transfers, and supplier communication. Employees were copying information between systems, calling other locations to confirm stock, and losing hours every week fixing mistakes that should never have happened. There has to be a cleaner way to connect this, Daniel told me. There probably is. That sounded suspiciously like volunteering. It was not. 2 weeks later, I was sitting at his kitchen table after work with my laptop open. At first, we treated the project exactly the way Patricia later remembered it, as a hobby. We worked Tuesday and Thursday evenings and most Saturday mornings. Daniel mapped workflows from businesses he knew, while I built a rough platform that could pull several basic tasks into one place. The first version was ugly. The dashboard looked like something designed 15 years earlier, and half the features required instructions that were longer than the features deserved. But it worked well enough for Daniel to show a local retailer with 4 stores. The owner agreed to test it. 3 weeks later, he told us his managers were spending less time calling one another to verify transfers. That was the first moment I wondered whether we had something larger than a weekend project. Daniel wondered sooner. We should form a company, he said. We have one customer. We have one customer without trying to sell anything. That is not the same as having a business. No, but it is how businesses sometimes start. I laughed at him. Then we formed the company anyway. My family heard about it at a 4th of July cookout at my parents' house. Dad asked practical questions about security, pricing, and whether Daniel and I had put our ownership agreement in writing. Mom wanted to know whether I was getting enough sleep. Patricia loved the whole thing. That is exactly what people your age should be doing, she said. Building something without throwing away the career you already have. At the time, I agreed with her. I had no intention of leaving my job. My salary paid the mortgage, health insurance was covered, and my employer matched part of my retirement contributions. The company could grow slowly on evenings and weekends. That plan lasted about 6 months. We added 3 more customers, then 7. None were large, but every new account created more support requests, more product changes, and more conversations we could not schedule around my regular job. Daniel had more flexibility than I did, so he handled most customer calls during business hours. I would finish work around 5:30, eat something quickly, then spend another 4 or 5 hours fixing problems or building features. Some nights I fell asleep with my laptop on the couch. The problem was not that the company was failing. The problem was that it was growing just enough to demand a decision. One Thursday, a prospective customer asked for a demonstration at 2 in the afternoon the following Tuesday. I could not attend because of a meeting at my regular job. Daniel did the demonstration alone. We lost the customer. Nobody told us my absence was the reason, but I knew we had reached the point where treating the business like a hobby was becoming its own kind of risk. I asked my manager whether I could move to a 4-day schedule. To my surprise, he agreed. My salary dropped accordingly, but I kept benefits and gained 1 full weekday for the company. I thought my family would see it as a cautious compromise. Dad did. Mom worried about the reduced income, but admitted the arrangement sounded reasonable. Patricia reacted as if I had announced I was quitting engineering to sell homemade candles from my garage. "You asked them to pay you less?" she said at Sunday dinner. "I asked to work fewer hours." "Which means they pay you less?" "Yes. Voluntarily. That is usually how reducing your schedule works." Jason laughed, and Patricia gave him a look. "I am trying to understand. I need more time for the company. Then work on it after work." "I already do. So why change something stable?" I explained the customer meetings, product development, and the fact that Daniel could not keep handling everything alone. Patricia listened, then asked the question that revealed exactly how differently we saw the decision. "How much is this company paying you?" "Nothing yet." Her eyebrows rose. "Nothing. We are putting the revenue back into development and operating costs. So you are giving up guaranteed income to spend more time working somewhere that does not pay you." "For now." Patricia looked toward Mom as if she expected someone else to explain why that made sense. Dad cut into his roast and said, "He still has a job, Patricia." "I know. I am not saying he is irresponsible." She looked at me again. "I just do not understand why you would risk a career you already have for one you invented." That sentence stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because it offended me, but because there was enough truth inside it to be uncomfortable. I was choosing uncertainty. I was earning less money. I was spending evenings working for a company that could disappear without ever paying me $1. If someone had shown me only those facts, I might have questioned the decision too. But Patricia could not see what Daniel and I were seeing. Customers were using the platform. They were requesting features. They were recommending us to other business owners. Problems that had once taken us days to identify were becoming patterns we could solve. For the first time in my career, I was not improving somebody else's product. I was responsible for whether ours deserved to exist. Over the next several months, Patricia stopped calling the company clever and started calling it Ryan's project. Then the side business. Eventually, whenever my mother mentioned it, Patricia would ask whether I was still doing that. I kept saying yes. What I did not understand yet was that the first year would turn out to be the easiest one. We still had savings. Customers were still growing. Every setback looked temporary. Daniel and I believed that if we worked harder, improved the platform, and landed one serious account, everything would accelerate. By the following spring, we were close to learning how dangerous that assumption could be. By the following spring, the company had reached the uncomfortable stage where it was too real to dismiss and too fragile to trust. Daniel and I had 14 paying customers, which sounded impressive whenever I said the number quickly, but most were small retailers paying modest monthly fees. After software expenses, insurance, accounting, customer support tools, and the contractors we occasionally needed, there was not much left. We still paid ourselves almost nothing. My 4-day engineering salary covered my personal expenses, but I had started using savings for business costs whenever revenue arrived later than expected. I told myself that was temporary. Daniel told himself the same thing. Then we applied to a technology accelerator in Charlotte. The program offered mentorship, investor introductions, and enough funding to give us several months of breathing room. We spent nearly 6 weeks preparing our application. We recorded product demonstrations, organized customer data, rebuilt our financial projections, and practiced answering questions about market size until I could explain our business in my sleep. We reached the interview round. Then we were rejected. The email arrived at 6:42 on a Wednesday morning while I was making coffee. Their explanation was polite. They liked our customer feedback, but questioned whether our platform was sufficiently differentiated from larger logistics products already available. I forwarded the message to Daniel. He called 2 minutes later. They are wrong. That is a useful analysis. I am serious. So am I? What are they wrong about? He paused. Our customers are not buying us because we are a smaller version of those platforms. Then apparently we are not explaining why they are buying us. That became our response to the rejection. We rewrote our sales material and kept going. 3 months later, a prospective customer with 21 stores approached us after hearing about the platform from one of our existing clients. It would have been our largest account by far. Daniel and I spent weeks preparing demonstrations and adapting features to their workflow. The operations director liked the product. The store managers liked it. Then their corporate office decided to standardize on a system offered by a larger vendor they already used for accounting. We lost the deal without ever getting a chance to compete on the final decision. That one hurt more than the accelerator. We had already started calculating what the revenue could mean. I had even wondered whether I might finally leave my engineering job entirely. Instead, nothing changed except the amount of time we had spent. Patricia heard about the lost account because I made the mistake of mentioning it to Mom. A week later, we were at my parents' house for Dad's birthday when Patricia asked, "Was that the big customer you were expecting?" "Potential customer," I said, "and they went somewhere else." "Yes." She gave me a sympathetic look that somehow felt worse than criticism. "That must be disappointing. It is part of sales." "Of course." Then she added, "At least you still have your real job." I knew what she meant. I also knew arguing would accomplish nothing. So I said, "Yes, I do." Around the same time, Jason received his first management promotion. Patricia was thrilled, and she had every right to be. The problem was that his progress became the measuring stick she used for mine. Jason had received a new title. I had received a rejection email. Jason had a salary increase. I was putting money into a company that barely paid me. Jason had a team reporting to him. Daniel and I were answering support messages ourselves at 11 at night. From Patricia's perspective, the comparison was obvious. From mine, it was becoming harder to prove she was wrong. That summer, we applied to another startup program and did not make the final round. A local investor agreed to meet us, listened carefully for 45 minutes, then told us our customer acquisition costs were too high for the revenue we were generating. He was not wrong. That was the part one hated. We had spent so much time telling ourselves that people did not understand the business that we had stopped asking whether some of their criticism was accurate. Daniel and I went through every expense and every customer account. The numbers were not catastrophic, but they were not encouraging. We were spending too much time customizing the platform for individual businesses. Every new customer created work that the monthly fee did not fully justify. We could grow revenue and still make our lives worse. One Friday night, I sat alone at my dining table with 12 months of bank statements spread across my laptop screen. I calculated how much personal savings I had transferred into the company. The total was just over $18,000. I could afford it, but seeing the number in one place changed how it felt. I closed the spreadsheet and did something I had avoided for months. I calculated what would happen if nothing improved. I gave us another year before I would have to make a serious decision. The next afternoon, Mom called while I was grocery shopping. We talked about ordinary things until she said, "Patricia asked about you." "That sounds dangerous." Mom laughed. "She worries." "No, she evaluates." "Ryan, what did she say?" Mom hesitated. "She asked whether you were still putting money into the business." I stopped beside a shelf of cereal. "How does she know I put money into it? You mentioned it at Christmas." I said founders sometimes cover expenses. I did not give her my bank statements. "I know." Mom lowered her voice. "She thinks you are holding on because you do not want to admit it has not worked." I stared at my shopping cart. "Do you think that?" "I think you are smart enough to know your limits." It was exactly the supportive answer I expected from my mother, and somehow it did not make me feel better. That night, Daniel came to my condo with takeout and a list of product issues. Before he opened his laptop, I asked him a question. If we had not built this company and somebody showed it to us today exactly as it is, would you invest your own money in it? He looked at me for a long time. That is not a fun question. It is not supposed to be. Would you? I do not know. For the first time since we started, neither of us rushed to defend what we had built. We spent the next 3 hours talking about what was actually working and what was not. By midnight, one fact was impossible to ignore. Our customers liked us, but they were not all using us for the same reason. We had built too much for too many different problems. The company was not dying, but it was drifting. And unless we changed something, Patricia might eventually be right for reasons she did not even understand. The change Daniel and I needed did not arrive as a brilliant idea. It arrived as an opportunity so large that we mistook it for proof that everything we had already built was working. About 6 weeks after that conversation at my condo, a regional retail chain based outside Greensboro contacted us. They operated 47 stores across North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia, and their operations team had heard about our platform through one of our customers. The first email looked ordinary enough. They wanted a demonstration. Daniel and I had done dozens of those by then. So we prepared the same presentation we normally used and drove to Greensboro on a Tuesday morning. 10 minutes into the meeting, I realized this was different. Their operations director, Melissa Grant, did not want a general overview. She had specific problems. Stores were transferring inventory between locations without consistent visibility. Managers were spending too much time confirming whether products had actually shipped. Their existing systems recorded inventory, but the coordination between locations still depended heavily on email, spreadsheets, and telephone calls. Daniel and I answered questions for nearly 2 hours. When we walked back to my car, he waited until the doors closed before saying, "This could change everything." I knew exactly what he meant. Even at a discounted enterprise rate, the contract would more than double our recurring revenue. More importantly, landing a customer with 47 locations would give us credibility we could not manufacture through marketing. For the next 4 months, that opportunity consumed us. We customized reporting tools, strengthened user permissions, improved data imports, and built features Melissa's team requested during testing. I used vacation days from my engineering job for meetings. Daniel drove to Greensboro so often that he knew which gas station had the best coffee along Interstate 40. Every step seemed to move us closer. Their information technology team completed a security review. Their store operations group ran a limited test. We revised pricing twice. Melissa told us she expected to recommend moving forward. I made the mistake of believing expected meant decided. I started building financial projections around the contract. Daniel researched hiring a customer support specialist. I even calculated whether the new revenue could finally allow me to leave my engineering position within 6 months. Dad was the only person in my family I told. I made him promise not to share details because nothing had been signed. He listened carefully, then said, "Do not spend money you have not earned yet. I am not spending it. You are planning around it. Planning is different. Sometimes." He was right, although I did not appreciate it then. The final meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in October. Daniel and I drove to Greensboro expecting to discuss implementation dates. Instead, Melissa entered the conference room with a man we had never met. She introduced him as the company's new chief operating officer. Their previous executive had left unexpectedly 3 weeks earlier, and the new leadership team was reviewing all technology projects that had not yet been contracted. I felt the outcome changing before anyone said it. Melissa explained that the company was pausing our project while they evaluated a broader enterprise system already used by their parent organization. "How long is the pause?" Daniel asked. The new executive answered, "At this point, I cannot give you a timeline." We both understood what that meant. 2 weeks later, Melissa called and confirmed it. The project was canceled. They were moving in another direction. She told us our work had been strong and the decision was not a reflection of the platform. None of that changed the result. For months of development had produced no contract. Worse, we had built several features specifically for a customer that would never use them. On the drive back to Raleigh, Daniel barely spoke. Somewhere near Burlington, he finally said, "We cannot keep doing this." Doing what? Building whatever the biggest prospect asks for. I stared at the highway. If we had said no to those features, we would not have gotten as far as we did. And getting far earned us exactly $0. I did not answer because he was right. The failure reached my family faster than I wanted. Mom asked about the contract one Sunday, and I told her it had fallen through. Patricia was standing in the kitchen when I said it. She did not make a joke. She did not smile. That would have been easier to dismiss. Instead, she looked genuinely sympathetic. "Ryan, maybe this is the universe telling you something." I leaned against the counter. The universe does not manage software companies. You know what I mean. I do. You have given this years. Not quite 2. That is still a long time. She lowered her voice. There is nothing shameful about admitting something did not become what you hoped. I have not decided that. Maybe you should at least consider it. Mom interrupted before I could answer, but Patricia's words followed me home. The worst part was that I was already considering exactly what she suggested. The next morning, I opened the folder containing my resume. I had not updated it in more than a year. I added the work I had done at my engineering job, then stopped when I reached the section where I would have to explain the company. What was I supposed to write? Co-founded a business that had consumed thousands of hours and nearly $20,000 of my savings? Built software customers liked, but not enough customers needed? Came close to several opportunities that never became anything? I closed the document. That evening, Daniel and I met at our small rented office. For the first time, we seriously discussed shutting the company down. Not immediately. We had existing customers to support and agreements to honor. But we set a deadline. 6 months. If we could not find a path to sustainable growth by then, we would stop putting personal money into the business and begin planning an orderly exit. Saying it out loud felt both terrifying and strangely calm. We finally had a limit. 2 days later, while I was at my engineering job, my telephone rang during lunch. The caller was Mark Ellison, who owned 12 specialty retail stores across central North Carolina and had been using our platform for almost a year. I assumed he had a support issue. Instead, he said, "Ryan, I want to show you something your software is doing for us." Is something wrong? No, that is why I am calling. He explained that his managers had mostly stopped using several of the features Daniel and I considered important. But there was one part of the platform they used constantly: the simple workflow for coordinating inventory transfers between stores. If you removed everything else tomorrow, Mark said, I would still pay you for that. I sat back in my chair. Just the transfer workflow? Not just, he said. That is the part you built that actually saves us time. After we hung up, I opened our usage data. Mark was right. Then I checked another customer. And another. By the end of my lunch break, I was staring at a pattern that had been sitting inside our own numbers for months. We had spent nearly 2 years trying to convince customers to value the whole platform. Maybe the business we needed had been hiding inside one small piece of it. The next morning, I showed Daniel the usage data before he had finished his first cup of coffee. He stared at my laptop for almost a minute, clicked through 3 customer accounts, then leaned back in his chair. We have been building the wrong company. That was my cheerful conclusion too. Daniel pulled the laptop closer. Across nearly every account with more than 5 locations, the same pattern appeared. Customers occasionally used our reporting tools and rarely touched several features we had spent months developing, but the inventory transfer workflow was different. Managers opened it every day. They used it to request products from another store, confirm availability, track approval, and record when inventory moved between locations. It was not glamorous. It was not the feature we had highlighted in investor meetings. It was simply useful. Mark said he would pay for this even if we removed everything else. I told Daniel. Then we need to find out whether Mark is unusual. Over the next 10 days, we called every active customer. We did not ask whether they liked the platform. We asked what they would miss if it disappeared. 9 customers gave us some version of the same answer. Store-to-store transfers. 3 said reporting. 2 mentioned supplier communication. Nobody named the complicated forecasting feature that had consumed nearly 4 months of my evenings. Daniel took that particularly hard because the forecasting module had been his idea. We should delete it, he said. You love that feature. I also loved a jacket in college that had 12 pockets. Loving something does not make it useful. We did not actually delete everything overnight. We spent 6 weeks rebuilding the product around one central problem: helping small and mid-sized retailers coordinate inventory transfers between locations without relying on scattered email threads, spreadsheets, and telephone calls. Features that supported that workflow stayed. Features that distracted from it were removed, simplified, or moved out of the main product. For the first time since forming the company, saying what we did became easy. Daniel could explain it to a store owner in 20 seconds. I could demonstrate the core workflow in 5 minutes. More importantly, customers understood why they would pay for it. Mark agreed to test the redesigned version across all 12 of his stores. He called after 3 weeks. Do not change it back. That is encouraging. I mean it. My managers actually know where transfers are now. That was the idea. Then congratulations. You finally built the thing I thought I was already buying. I laughed, but his comment stayed with me. Customers had been telling us what business we were in before we were willing to hear them. The change showed up slowly in our numbers. Support requests became easier because customers were using similar workflows. New accounts required less customization. Onboarding that once took weeks could often be completed in days. We adjusted pricing so it made sense by location rather than by a confusing combination of users and features. 3 existing customers upgraded. 2 referrals became paying accounts. Then a retailer with 19 stores signed without asking us to build a single custom feature. Daniel printed the signed agreement and taped it above his desk. This is the first customer who bought what we already had. That sounds less impressive when you say it out loud. It is the most impressive thing we have done. He was right. By the end of that quarter, recurring revenue had increased enough that we stopped transferring personal money into the company. We still were not paying ourselves meaningful salaries, but for the first time, the business was covering its own operating expenses. I left my savings account alone for 3 consecutive months. That felt more significant than any pitch competition would have. I told Mom the company was improving. I told Dad we had changed the product and were seeing better retention. I did not tell Patricia much of anything. It was not punishment. I had simply grown tired of translating every small step into a form she might consider respectable. At Thanksgiving that year, she asked whether I was still on the reduced schedule at my engineering job. Yes. Any plans to go back full-time? Not right now. She nodded in the careful way people do when they have already formed an opinion but do not want to start an argument before dessert. Then Jason mentioned that his company was considering him for another promotion. Patricia immediately brightened. That is what I keep telling him. Build momentum while you are young. Jason looked embarrassed. Nothing has happened yet. It will. She turned to me. You understand what I mean. Sometimes stability creates opportunities too. I'm sure it does. She seemed disappointed that I did not argue. What Patricia could not see was that our company had just signed its 26th customer. She did not know our customer retention had improved dramatically since the redesign. She did not know Daniel, and I had begun receiving introductions from retail consultants who had previously ignored us. None of those facts felt large enough to announce over turkey and stuffing, so I let her believe what she wanted. 2 months later, one of those introductions changed the scale of the conversation. Karen Mitchell, a consultant who worked with independent retail associations across the Southeast, asked Daniel and me to demonstrate our platform during a virtual meeting. We assumed she had a client in mind. Instead, she spent most of the call asking about our architecture, security practices, onboarding process, and whether the system could support several hundred stores without major changes. How many locations are you thinking about? Daniel asked. Karen smiled. I am not thinking about one retailer. She explained that a national organization supporting small and mid-sized businesses was developing an initiative to help member retailers improve inventory coordination. They were evaluating technology companies for several roles, including a platform that could support transfers between independently operated locations. I try not to react too quickly. Are they accepting applications? Not publicly. Then why are we talking? Because I gave them your name. Daniel and I looked at each other. Karen continued. Do not make too much of that yet. An introduction is not a selection. They will want technical documentation, customer references, security information, financial records, and probably several demonstrations. When would that process start? I asked. If they decide to include you soon. Before ending the call, Karen added one more condition. Until they announce the initiative, treat everything we discussed as confidential. Afterward, Daniel closed his laptop and stared at me. We agreed 6 months. I remember. We are 4 months into that deadline. I remember that too. And now this happens. I looked at the customer dashboard on my screen. Months earlier, I would have treated Karen's introduction as proof we had finally made it. I had learned better. It is a conversation, I said. Nothing more. 3 days later, an email arrived from the organization's program director inviting us into the first evaluation round. Attached was a confidentiality agreement and a list of materials due within 10 business days. Daniel called me immediately. Still just a conversation? Yes. You are becoming very annoying. Experience. I signed the agreement that afternoon. For the next several weeks, my family knew only that I was busy. Patricia assumed that meant I was still struggling to keep my little company alive. For once, I was perfectly comfortable letting her assume it. The evaluation process began with a request for documents that made Daniel and me wonder whether the organization wanted to partner with us or audit our entire existence. They asked for customer retention data, security policies, system architecture, financial statements, insurance coverage, support procedures, ownership records, and references from current customers. 2 years earlier, half of those documents either would not have existed or would have embarrassed me. Now we had answers. Not perfect answers, but real ones. We submitted everything before the deadline and waited. 9 days later, the program director, Emily Carter, invited us to a technical review. The call included 4 people we had never met. One specialized in cybersecurity, another in retail operations, and 2 represented the organization's technology team. They asked questions for nearly 90 minutes. What happened if a store lost internet access? How do we separate customer data? How quickly could we onboard 50 locations? What happened if usage doubled in a month? Could independently owned stores coordinate transfers without exposing information they did not want competitors to see? I answered what I knew and admitted what I did not. When the call ended, Daniel looked exhausted. How bad was that? I have no idea. You said, I do not know 3 times. Would you prefer I invent 3 answers? No. I would prefer to know everything. That seems reasonable. We should become different people before the next meeting. A week later, Emily emailed us. We had advanced. The next stage focused on customers. They wanted references, usage information, and permission to interview several business owners directly. Mark volunteered immediately. So did 3 other customers. We were not allowed to sit in on those interviews. That made waiting worse. Mark called me afterward, but because of the evaluation rules, he would only say, I told them the truth. Was the truth good? Most of it. Mark, he laughed. Relax. If they wanted a commercial, they would have asked you to write one. That answer bothered me for an entire weekend. On Monday, Emily contacted us again. We had advanced to the financial and operational review. By then, almost 2 months had passed since Karen's introduction. I had told my parents only that Daniel and I were exploring a possible partnership. I could not identify the organization or discuss the process because of the confidentiality agreement. Dad respected that. Mom tried to respect it, but occasionally asked questions she knew I could not answer. Patricia simply assumed vague language meant there was nothing concrete behind it. At a family lunch in March, she asked whether the company was still hanging in there. It is doing better than hanging in there, I said. That is good. Then Jason arrived, and Patricia immediately began talking about a leadership program his employer had selected him for. Jason caught my eye from across the room and gave me an apologetic expression. I smiled because none of it bothered me the way it once had. I had finally stopped treating Patricia's understanding as a business metric. The financial review was less comfortable. Emily's team examined our revenue concentration, operating expenses, cash reserves, and whether we could support growth without collapsing under it. One reviewer asked why Daniel and I still had outside income. Daniel answered first, because we decided stability was more useful than pretending we were larger than we are. The reviewer nodded. That is a better answer than I usually get. I almost laughed. For years, Patricia had treated my reduced engineering schedule as evidence that the company had failed to become a real career. In that meeting, the same decision was treated as evidence that we had managed risk responsibly. Context changed everything. 2 weeks later, we were told we had reached the final group. Emily still refused to tell us how many companies remained. More than 1 and fewer than you would like, she said. That is intentionally unhelpful, I replied. Correct. The final stage would include a live product demonstration, a scaling exercise, and a discussion about a limited national rollout. The phrase national rollout stayed in my head for days. Daniel warned me not to build fantasies around it. I reminded him that he had been the optimistic one when we started. I have matured, he said. You have become anxious. That is what maturity is. While all of this was happening, Jason received the promotion Patricia had been expecting. He called me before the family knew. I got it. That is great. You mean that? Why would I not? Because Mom is going to make Thanksgiving look subtle. I laughed. You earned the promotion. Whatever she does with it is not your fault. How is your thing going? Which thing? The secret thing you refuse to explain. Still secret. Good secret or bad secret? Potentially good. That sounds like something a hostage negotiator would say. I almost told him more. Instead, I congratulated him again and changed the subject. A few days later, Mom called to say she wanted everyone over for dinner the following Sunday to celebrate Jason. I checked my calendar while she spoke. The timing caught my attention immediately. Our final evaluation was scheduled for Thursday. Emily had told us the organization expected to notify selected partners by Friday, with a public announcement the following Monday morning if approvals stayed on schedule. Sunday dinner would fall directly between the private decision and the public release. "Ryan," Mom said, "are you there?" "Yes." "Can you come?" "I think so." "You think so?" "There is something happening with work that week." "Your engineering job?" "The company." She became quiet. "Is this the thing you cannot tell me about?" "Yes." "Should I be worried?" "No." "Should I be excited?" "Also no." "You are terrible at being someone's son." "I am trying not to promise anything." She sighed. 6 o'clock Sunday. I will be there. Thursday arrived faster than I wanted. Daniel and I drove to Charlotte for the final evaluation at the organization's regional office. We demonstrated the platform using a simulated network of 60 stores. The first half went smoothly. Then one transfer request failed to synchronize correctly between two test accounts. My stomach tightened, but I did not hide it. I explained what we were seeing, opened the diagnostic information, and showed the reviewers how the system recovered once the connection refreshed. Afterward, Emily asked whether the error concerned me. "Yes," I said. "Why?" "Because anything that fails in a demonstration can fail for a customer. And why should that not disqualify you?" I thought about the company we had been 2 years earlier, when every criticism felt like something to defend against. Because I can show you exactly what failed, why it failed, and what we need to improve. I would be more concerned if we pretended it did not matter. Emily wrote something down. I could not read her expression. Daniel and I drove back to Raleigh without trying to predict the result. Friday passed until 4:38 in the afternoon. Then an email from Emily appeared. "Please make yourselves available for a call at 5:15. Daniel was already dialing me before I finished reading it. This is either very good or very bad. Or administrative. Nobody schedules an administrative call at 5:15 on Friday. At 5:14, we joined the video meeting. Emily appeared on screen, smiled once, and said, "I will keep this simple. The committee has completed its review. You have been selected as the technology partner for the inventory coordination portion of the initiative," Emily said. For several seconds, neither Daniel nor I responded. I had spent so much time preparing myself for another rejection that the sentence seemed to arrive in a language I understood but could not immediately process. Daniel finally leaned toward his camera. "Selected as in final?" Emily smiled. "Selected as in the committee approved your company for the initial rollout." I looked away from the screen and exhaled. The office around me had not changed. Same inexpensive desk. Same whiteboard covered with customer issues. Same coffee mug I had forgotten to wash that morning. Yet something about the room suddenly felt different. "What exactly does initial rollout mean?" I asked. Emily's expression became serious again, and I appreciated that. She was not selling us a fantasy. The organization planned to introduce the initiative in several regional markets first, working with participating retailers before deciding whether to expand nationally. Our platform would handle inventory transfer coordination for the pilot. The agreement included implementation funding, a 12-month service contract, and the possibility of expansion if the program met specific performance targets. It was the largest commercial opportunity our company had ever received, but it was not guaranteed forever. "There is another important condition," Emily said. "The announcement remains confidential until Monday morning at 9 Eastern Time. The communications team has coordinated the release with all selected partners. Please do not disclose your involvement publicly or privately outside anyone already covered by the confidentiality agreement." "Even family?" Daniel asked. "Especially family if your family enjoys social media." Daniel laughed. "Mine does." "Then definitely family." Emily told us we would receive final communication materials over the weekend. After the call ended, Daniel stayed completely still for about 5 seconds. Then he said, "We got it. We got the pilot. You are not allowed to reduce this moment with vocabulary. I am trying to be accurate. You are trying to protect yourself from happiness." That irritated me because it was probably true. Daniel stood and walked to the whiteboard where, for months earlier, we had written the 6-month deadline for deciding whether to continue the company. He erased the date with his sleeve. I have wanted to do that for weeks. I watched the numbers disappear. We still have a lot to prove. Yes. On Monday, he turned toward me. Today, we are allowed to admit something worked. I finally smiled. Something worked. That evening, I drove home expecting to feel triumphant. Instead, I felt tired. For nearly 3 years, every opportunity had arrived carrying a warning label in my mind. Do not assume. Do not spend ahead. Do not celebrate before the contract. Do not mistake interest for commitment. Now we had a written selection, a service agreement moving through final execution, and an announcement schedule. Even then, part of me was waiting for someone to call and say there had been a mistake. Saturday morning, the final agreement arrived electronically. Daniel and I reviewed it with the attorney who had helped us with our customer contracts. By early afternoon, signatures were complete. The numbers were real. The initial contract would not make either of us wealthy, but it would allow us to hire support, strengthen infrastructure, and finally begin paying ourselves consistently from the company. More important, successful performance could put our platform in front of hundreds of participating locations. I wanted to call Dad. I wanted to call Mom. I even wanted to tell Patricia, partly because I remembered every careful expression she had made when she thought I was wasting my time. I told none of them. Sunday arrived with the strange knowledge that I would be sitting across from my family while carrying the biggest professional news of my life and pretending nothing had changed. Before leaving for my parents' house, Daniel called. Remember, 9 tomorrow. I know. Do not tell anybody. I know. Not even if your aunt starts. Why would my aunt start? He laughed. Because every story you tell about her ends with her starting. I arrived at my parents' house shortly before 6. Jason was already there. Mom had made pot roast, roasted potatoes, green beans, and apple pie because those were his favorites. Patricia had brought a bottle of wine and enough enthusiasm about Jason's promotion to fill the room before dinner even began. Jason caught me near the kitchen. I apologize in advance. For what? Whatever my mother says tonight. You have a promotion. She is proud. She is competitive on my behalf. That is different. You cannot control her. Neither can civilization. I laughed. Congratulations again. Thanks. Now tell me about your secret project. Tomorrow. He narrowed his eyes. That's specific? Very. Interesting. Dinner began pleasantly. Patricia told us about Jason's new title, his expanded responsibilities, and the leadership team he would be joining. Jason corrected her twice when she exaggerated details. Dad asked him thoughtful questions about the job. Mom raised her glass and said she was proud of him. I meant it when I said the same. Then Patricia turned toward me. And Ryan, are you still working 4 days a week at the engineering company? Yes. After all this time, it still works for me. And the business? Still there. Still there, she repeated. That is an interesting way to describe 3 years of work. Mom looked at her sister. Patricia. What? I am asking. Jason sighed. Mom, tonight is supposed to be dinner, not an annual performance review. Patricia ignored him. I just wonder what the plan is. Jason is younger than Ryan, and now he is moving into senior management. Jason put down his fork. Please stop comparing us. I am not comparing you. I am saying there are different ways to measure progress. You are literally comparing us. I kept eating. That seemed to bother Patricia more than an argument would have. Ryan, I know you believe in what you are doing. I respect persistence. But eventually persistence has to produce something. Dad said, enough. Patricia looked genuinely surprised. Why is everyone so sensitive? If his company is doing well, this should be an easy question. She turned back to me. 3 years, Ryan. What have you actually achieved? The room went silent. I looked at the wall clock behind Dad. 8:17. For one strange second, I thought about everything Patricia could not see. The 14 customers, the lost Greensboro contract, the $18,000 from my savings, Mark's 12 stores, the redesign, 26 customers, Karen's introduction, the evaluations, Friday's call, and the agreement I had signed less than 30 hours earlier. I could have told her enough to end the conversation. Instead, I remembered Emily's instruction and looked back at my aunt. Tomorrow should answer that. Patricia blinked. Tomorrow? Yes. What happens tomorrow? You will see. She gave a short laugh. Tomorrow is not an achievement. No, I said. But what happens tomorrow might be. At that moment, I believe the hardest part was simply waiting 13 more hours. I had no idea that before the announcement went live, Daniel would call me with the one sentence I did not want to hear. Ryan, we have a problem. Daniel called at 10:43 Sunday night, less than 2 hours after I left my parents' house. I was standing in my kitchen with my jacket still on when I saw his name. Ryan, we have a problem. The words erased every trace of satisfaction I had carried home from dinner. What happened? The final integration test failed. I put my keys on the counter. Which integration? The regional data exchange. Emily's technical team ran the scheduled test about 20 minutes ago. 2 of the simulated locations are not receiving transfer updates consistently. Did they send logs? They sent everything. I am opening them now. I walked straight to my desk and opened my laptop. The public announcement was scheduled for 9 o'clock the next morning. 11 hours earlier, I had sat across from Patricia and calmly told her that tomorrow would provide the answer she wanted. Now tomorrow had become a deadline I was suddenly afraid to reach. Daniel forwarded the technical report. The failure was narrow but serious enough to matter. Most test locations were synchronizing normally, but 2 accounts connected through the partner environment were receiving delayed status updates. Nothing suggested lost inventory data, but a delayed transfer status could create exactly the confusion our platform was supposed to eliminate. Did Emily say the announcement is canceled? I asked. No. She said final approval is temporarily pending while they determine whether the issue is ours, theirs, or somewhere between the 2 systems. Temporarily pending at 10:43 the night before launch is not a phrase I enjoy. You think I do? I called Emily. She answered on the second ring, which told me her evening was going about as well as ours. Ryan, I was about to call you. Daniel sent the report. Good. Our technical team is online. Is the release still scheduled? There was a pause. At the moment, yes. And are we still in it? Another pause. I cannot promise that until this is resolved. That was the sentence I had feared. I thanked her and joined the technical conference call. For the next several hours, Daniel and I worked with 2 engineers from the organization and 1 specialist from the outside system handling the regional test environment. We compared timestamps, traced requests, reviewed authentication records, and repeated the same transfer scenario under different conditions. At 12:26 in the morning, we reproduced the delay. At 12:51, we discovered something important. The transfer request left our platform on time. The receiving environment acknowledged it, but one configuration in the test system was processing certain update messages in batches rather than immediately. That suggested the problem might not be inside our core platform. Suggested was not enough. We had to prove it. Daniel ran another controlled test while I documented every step. At 1:34, the same delay appeared. Then the outside specialist changed the configuration on 1 test account. We ran it again. The update arrived normally. Run it 5 more times, I said. Daniel looked at me through the video window. You heard the man. We ran it 5 times. Then 10. No delay. Nobody celebrated. Emily's technical lead wanted a broader test across all simulated locations. At 2:17, that test began. I walked into my kitchen while it ran and made coffee I did not need. My telephone showed 2 messages from Mom sent earlier. The first said she was glad I came to dinner. The second said, do not let your aunt get under your skin. I almost laughed. Patricia was no longer the problem. I was thinking about something much larger than proving a relative wrong. If the partnership disappeared, Daniel and I would still have a functioning company. We would still have customers and recurring revenue. But after everything we had survived, losing the biggest opportunity of our lives hours before it became public would be difficult to absorb. At 2:41, the broader test completed successfully. The technical lead asked for 1 more run using the original configuration so they could confirm the difference. That test reproduced the delay almost immediately. The evidence was clear. The problem came from a configuration in the partner test environment, not from the transfer logic in our platform. Emily joined the call again shortly after 3. This is encouraging, she said. Encouraging is not approved, Daniel replied. Correct. The technical team will prepare its finding. Final authorization still has to come from the program leadership. When? I asked. Before the release. That is a very large window when the release is 6 hours away. I know. We ended the call at 3:18. Daniel wanted to stay awake. I told him that staring at email would not make approval arrive faster. He told me I was welcome to follow my own advice. Neither of us did. I lay on my couch for perhaps 40 minutes without sleeping, then got up before 5. At 6:12, Daniel sent one message. Nothing yet. At 7:03, Emily emailed to say the technical finding had been accepted and the issue had been classified as external configuration, but final launch authorization was still pending. That should have relieved me. Instead, the last 4 words became all I could see. At 8 o'clock, I was at our office. Daniel arrived carrying 2 coffees. "How much did you sleep?" he asked. "Enough to lie about it." "Same." We opened the organization's public website on one monitor and our email on another. At 8:32, there was still no authorization. At 8:47, nothing. Daniel paced between his desk and the window. I sat still because movement would not change the outcome. At 8:56, I checked my telephone. Mom had sent, "Is this the thing you meant?" She had no idea what she was asking about yet. I did not answer. At 8:58, Daniel refreshed the inbox. Nothing. "They cannot possibly announce this without telling us first," he said. "Apparently they can do anything they want." At 8:59, I remembered Patricia's face across the dinner table. For one irrational second, I imagined having to explain that the tomorrow I had spoken about so confidently had arrived with nothing to show. Then the clock on my laptop changed to 9 o'clock. Daniel refreshed the public page. The old page disappeared. A new banner loaded across the top announcing the organization's retail logistics initiative. We both leaned toward the screen. There were several paragraphs of text, a list of regional pilot markets, and a section labeled Technology Partners. Daniel scrolled once, then stopped. Our company name was there. For several seconds, Daniel and I simply stared at the screen. Our company name was there in plain text beneath the announcement, listed as the technology partner responsible for inventory transfer coordination during the regional pilot. There was no dramatic music, no crowd, no oversized check, and no sudden transformation of our little office. There were only 2 exhausted men looking at a web page at 9 in the morning after barely sleeping. Daniel finally pointed at the monitor. "You see it too, right?" "I see it." "Good." I wanted to make sure I was not hallucinating from lack of sleep. At 9:03, Emily's email arrived confirming final authorization. At 9:07, Karen sent congratulations. At 9:11, Mark texted that he had already forwarded the announcement to 3 business owners he knew. Then my telephone began filling with messages. Mom was first. "Ryan, is this what you meant?" Dad followed less than a minute later. "Proud of you. Call when you can." I was about to answer when the family group conversation lit up. Jason had posted the public announcement with one sentence. "I believe Ryan's mysterious tomorrow has officially arrived." Mom responded with 3 exclamation points. Dad wrote, "Looks that way." Patricia said nothing. I expected that silence to feel satisfying. It did not. The strange thing about finally receiving public recognition was how little it changed the private history that had brought us there. The announcement did not restore the savings I had invested. It did not erase the accelerator rejection, the lost Greensboro contract, or the night's Daniel, and I wondered whether we were building something nobody needed. It did not make every decision I had made correct. It simply proved that enough of those decisions had led somewhere worth continuing. Our 9:15 partner briefing began before I could call my parents. Emily walked us through the rollout schedule. The pilot would begin in 3 regional markets with participating retailers joining in stages. We would receive implementation funding and service revenue under the 12-month agreement, but expansion would depend on measurable results. If adoption was weak or transfer accuracy did not meet the program's targets, there would be no automatic national expansion. I appreciated hearing that. After 3 years, I no longer needed success to sound magical. I needed it to be real. By 10:30, Daniel and I were already discussing hiring a support specialist and reviewing infrastructure capacity. The biggest professional announcement of my life gave us about 90 minutes to celebrate before turning into more work. Shortly before noon, Patricia called. I watched her name on the screen for a moment before answering. "Hi, Aunt Patricia." "Ryan." Her voice sounded different from the night before, less certain. "I saw the announcement. I figured you might. Jason sent it to everyone." "Yes." She paused. "This is a national organization?" "Yes." "And your company was selected?" "For the inventory coordination portion of the initial rollout." "How big is that?" It would have been easy to exaggerate. Instead, I explained exactly what the agreement meant. 3 regional pilot markets. A 12-month service contract. Expansion possible if the program performed well. Significant for us, but not a guarantee of anything beyond what had actually been signed. Patricia listened quietly. So you knew about this last night? I knew we had been selected. I could not discuss it before the public announcement. Why did you never tell us you were doing this well? I leaned back in my chair. That question bothered me more than anything she had said at dinner. I did tell you when things were improving. Not like this. Because it was not like this yet. You know what I mean. I think I do. I paused. When the progress was small, you did not think it counted. She did not answer. When we had 14 customers, you saw a company that barely paid me. When we lost a big contract, you saw proof I should quit. When we changed the product and started growing, you still asked when I was going back to full-time engineering. I was not hiding the work from you. You decided anything you could not see clearly was not much of an achievement. I was worried about you. I know. I did not want you wasting years because you were too stubborn to stop. And sometimes I needed to hear that possibility. There were months when Daniel and I had to ask ourselves the same question. That seemed to surprise her. Then you admit I was not completely wrong. This is not about whether you were wrong to worry. It is about deciding you already knew the answer. The line became quiet. Finally, Patricia said, I suppose I did that. It was not an apology, exactly, but it was closer than I expected. That evening, Jason called. For the record, I told her months ago to stop comparing us. I know. I hate when she uses my career like evidence against yours. You did not do anything wrong. Still, it makes every good thing that happens to me feel like ammunition. I had never considered that Patricia's comparisons were unfair to him too. Then maybe we both stop participating, I said. Agreed. Over the next several months, the pilot became less exciting and more demanding, which was exactly what real opportunities tend to do. We hired our first full-time support specialist. I eventually left my engineering job after the company could reliably pay me without depending on future expansion. The rollout met its early targets, although not every week went smoothly. Some retailers needed extra training. A few integrations took longer than expected. Nothing became effortless simply because our name appeared in an announcement. Patricia changed more slowly. She did not suddenly understand software or stop caring about traditional career milestones. But at a family cookout later that summer, she sat beside me on my parents' back porch and asked, "How is the company doing?" I gave the automatic answer I had learned to use around family. Busy. She shook her head. No. I mean really. Tell me what you were working on. I looked at her, waiting for the comparison that usually followed. It never came. So I told her about the rollout, the new employee, the problems we were solving, and the ones we had not solved yet. She listened. That was all. And sitting there, I understood something the announcement itself had not taught me. Achievement did not begin on the morning other people finally recognized it. It had been accumulating quietly in every customer who stayed, every mistake we corrected, every rejection we survived, and every decision to change when stubbornness would have been easier. Monday morning had not created our progress. It had only made that progress visible to people who had never learned how to see it while it was still being built.